Hello, and welcome back to Storytime with Albert. Today we're going to talk about the range of the P6. Let's get into it. So, yesterday, a couple days ago, we had lent a wheel to Marty in order for him to do a good instrumented test of the range capabilities of the P6. Now, I've always been the proponent saying that watt hours is watt hours. And yes, different wheels might differ by like 5 or 10%, but ultimately, you cannot cheat watt hours. So, no matter what the voltage of the wheel, the efficiency of the wheel, the difference is mainly made in aerodynamics. So if you have the same rider on the same two wheels riding in very similar environments and similar styles, as long as the watt hours are equal, the range should be somewhat equal. Again, plus or minus 5 or 10%. However, yesterday when Marty had taken the wheel out, he had put a video on Telegram stating that the range of the P6 was atrocious. And I agree, like based on his testing, according to his tests, he was at about 40% battery compared to a Sherman L doing the same ride that could be around 70% battery. So over the last 24 hours, I have been conversing with Mark Yu and trying to figure out why there is such a large discrepancy. And we've been trying to figure it out, but we're operating under the assumption that the percentages of the battery are accurate. And the bars on Leaper Kim's display are accurate. Now, we were not, of course, the first issue is we're not comparing voltage to voltage because we didn't have that data at the time. And of course, when Marty does his full range test, then we'll have that data. But Marty reached out today, and as we were trying to figure this out, I was actually preparing to make this explanation to you guys. Marty actually reached out to me because he posted this picture on Telegram of a screenshot of a free spin. And on this screenshot, the main thing to see is that it's showing 19% battery at 194.3 volts. Now, 194.3 volts, if you divide that out by the series of cells in the battery, comes up to about 3.45 volts. And traditionally, we used to use this graph for all of our wheels. And of course, I've changed this graph to represent the P6 voltage. So at 100%, you're at 235.2, which is 4.2 volts per cell. All the way down to 0%, again, this is a ballpark. So 0% is usually on these graphs set at 3 volts per cell, which would be 168 volts. So based on this curve, instead of the 19% shown on the wheel reported by the wheel, at 194 volts, it should be around 40%. So this is the first thing that Marty found out, which can, of course, contribute to the drastic percentage state of charge difference between the Leaper Kim Sherman L and the Inmotion P6. Now, I have here a battery discharge graph. And here you can see the discharge voltage here. On the top is on the left is voltage, and on the horizontal is the capacity. So as you can see, and like a lot of people that ride EUCs for extended period of time may already know this, but the voltage drops at the top end of the scale are quite quick. So you jump on your fully charged wheel, you ride down a block or two, and suddenly you're down to 4 volts per cell. Now, as you ride further, the battery capacity looks really good and it holds really well. And then once you pass that 50% mark, which is based on the traditional thinking, the 3.5, 3.6 volts per cell, the battery starts to drop precipitously. And it starts to drop super quickly until you're basically out of range. And so most manufacturers have used a linear scale to correlate the discharge graph of the battery and how you use your range. And as riders, we're used to knowing that the top 50 is twice as large as the bottom 50% of the battery.
I didn't know that.
Most enthusiasts know that the top 50 has more battery than the bottom 50. And now Christine knows, so we're good. And so with Inmotion wheels in general, now of course there's still some changes that need to be fixed in the firmware and the display of the battery percentage on the wheel and how it's calculated. But in the past and in the current for the P6, Inmotion uses the capacity or the theoretical capacity of the battery cell, which is actually the area under the graph. So at higher battery voltages, you'll see on regular wheels that the battery percentage will drop very quickly, whereas on the P6 it may drop not as quickly. However, at the bottom half of the range, the P6 might hold up a little longer than other wheels. So the comparison of battery percentage from wheel to wheel is a little bit less apples to apples, let's say. So in order to make the comparison more apples to apples, now that EUC World, thank you, Siva, and through your hard work with Marty, thank you for creating the P6 compatibility on EUC World. Marty will then be able to redo his range test, or maybe do it more instrumentally, his range test, and give us what the true rating should be. And I believe it should be around in line with the Sherman L, maybe 5 or 10% here or there. Maybe 5% here or there, I think is a better metric. But as soon as he comes up with his metrics, we'll therefore know the full range. But this is the explanation of why in first appearances it seemed like the battery voltage or the thirstiness of the P6 may have been very, very excessive. Now, some people were asking about the low battery behavior of the wheel, and so I will explain that in here. Let me just find it. P6 owners. So, if you're wondering how the P6 low battery or the range for those range monsters out there is protected at the bottom end of the battery voltage, if you sustain 2.9 volts per battery cell, so if we go back to this chart here, so if your wheel is sustained below 100 and say 2.9 times 56, 162 volts for more than 3 seconds, the wheel will provide you a warning as well as tilt back. However, if the battery sag comes back up and the voltage is above 168 volts for more than 5 seconds, then the warning and the tilt back will return back to normal. Now, in terms of the limits of the wheel, we have limited the current, bus current, which is the battery, or similar to the battery current, to the following. Let me see if I can pull up this picture here. So if your battery is less than 10%, the current limit is limited to 30 amps. Under 5% is 10 amps, and at 1% battery, it is 5 amps. Now, we don't want you guys to push hard at lower ends of the battery, because when a battery goes below 2.9 and potentially down lower than 2.9, you are sacrificing a lot of battery longevity for that small amount of battery fun that you're going to have. And so with Inmotion, we're trying to allow you guys to have as much fun as you can without sacrificing your longevity. This way you can still be able to kind of limp it home, walk it home without being stranded at the very, very low percentiles of the battery. Hopefully this kind of sums up the low battery concerns and range concerns that people may have. Also, anecdotally, at New York, again, the battery percentages quoted is based on the screen, which will still be recalibrated to match the 3 volt limit and we will revalidate that as well. So the percentages may not transfer 1-to-1 when you get your wheel. But at the current 30% battery limit, Adam in New York City was able to hit 66 miles per hour. And at 20% battery, Mr. Suit was able to hit 54 miles per hour. Now, evidently, of course, the 20% was at potentially at 190 something volts. Let me pull that screen back up. 194 volts, which based on traditional methods would equate to 40% battery. So hopefully this clears a little bit up. Again, like this isn't a pure tried and true solution. However, we will again monitor the results of what Marty gets and try our hardest to figure out why or where we have room for improvement. Now, some extra data that we were looking into for those that like to get a little nerdy into the wheel, and I was trying to figure out yesterday if there was any other reason or sources why the wheel could be more thirsty than other wheels. Mark, you happened to be at the factory, and so I asked him to check what the idle power consumption of our board is, and the idle power consumption was around 12.8 watts. This is without the lights being turned on, without the logo light, without the screen. So if you add all those, it could be up to around 30 watts idle. And how that compares to a Sherman L is actually the Sherman L should be around 5 watts at idle. So yes, our control board utilizes a little bit more wattage because of the high power architecture and the fancy main board, as well as the screen and all the Ride Connect that we provide to you. But of course, in the grand scheme of things, the difference of 7 watts isn't huge because 7 watts times 10 hours of idling is 70 watt hours. A 4200 watt hour battery, it's pretty inconsequential. So I thank Marty for kind of bringing this up to our attention, which allows us to kind of dig deeper and try to figure out reasoning. But as of right now, the biggest reason that we found is the battery percentage calculation. So as we rework the battery percentage calculation, we will not change it to the traditional method because we prefer to use the real capacity or the theoretical capacity based on the discharge curve, because we feel that gives a more accurate representation to riders like Christine, who may not know that 50% the low 50% will die really quickly. And that allows riders to easily estimate if you get to a location with 50% battery, you should be able to get home with that same bottom 50% battery and not get stranded. Hopefully this clears a little bit up, and we'll create more story times as more problems are found and as more solutions come up. See you on the next one.